If you've been struggling with belly fat that just won't budge, I've got the ultimate strategy to blast through it. I'm going to share some key tactics for even better results. But here's the kicker. You've got to nail this first strategy I'm going to share, or nothing else is going to work. So first off, before we get into it, we're talking about visceral adipose tissue, that fat, not that stuff that you can pinch. This is different. Visceral adipose tissue is a type of body fat that's stored within the abdominal cavity. It's located near several vital organs like your liver, your stomach, and your intestines. And you can't pinch it, but you can test it both on a DEXA. That's where you go and get an image of your body and you can see not just your body fat, but where that body fat is. But you can also track it at home. And this is where a tape measure comes into play. There's a tape measure called a Renpho Bluetooth tape measure. It costs like $30. And it's great because it's going to go straight into an app on your phone. And you're going to want to do two different measurements. You're going to want to do a waist that you compare to your height, and you want to make sure that your waist is at least half of the size of your height, right? So your waist in inches is less compared to your height. And then you're going to do a waist to hip measurement. Waist narrowest point right around your belly button, hip widest point with your feet together. And for a man, you want to make sure your waist to hip is less than 1. For a woman, it's less than 0.8. So that's how you're going to be able to monitor this at home. Now, why is fat the worst fat? It's because it is strongly correlated, linked with a higher risk of a bunch of different really bad health conditions, things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke, because it is linked to insulin resistance and inflammation. It's very metabolically active and it really influences insulin. And remember, insulin resistance also happens when there's excessive fat around these organs because it disrupts the normal adipocyte signaling, the fat cell signaling, and metabolism. Now, here's what's great news. It's actually easier to lose than subcutaneous fat. So let's talk about caloric restriction first. This is strategy number 1. In order for you to know how much to restrict your calories, the first thing you need to know is how many calories do you need to maintain your weight. The best way to do this is to do a macro audit. So all you do to start is use an app. I like the Chronometer app. We'll link to that in the show notes. And what you do is keep everything the same and track what you're eating. And I mean track. You have to weigh it, right? Otherwise, you're guessing. And the research shows that we underestimate what we eat by anywhere from 10 to 25%. You're going to weigh and measure everything you do for a week, keeping everything the same, and see how many calories you use on average. You're taking the average of the week to maintain your weight. Then you're going to do 25% less. Next step, remember I said it was caloric restriction and then where the calories come from? What you eat matters because you're not losing weight to get healthy. You're actually getting metabolically healthy to lose weight, but really to lose fat and hold on to or build muscle. And you have to help get yourself past insulin resistance in order to do that. Here's the reality. If you're eating a diet that's higher in what are called ultra-processed foods or higher carbs, they are more problematic for visceral adipose tissue and insulin resistance. In fact, ultra-processed foods are associated with eating more overall and more visceral adipose tissue. There was a randomized controlled trial that looked at the contribution of ultra-processed foods in visceral fat deposition, and it was called the PREDIMED Plus trial, and there were 1,485 Spanish men and women ages 55 to 75. And what they did is they did body comp measurements and a food frequency questionnaire at the beginning, 6 months in and 12 months in. And what they did was they categorized the food by the degree of processing. And then they also looked at fat, android to gynoid fat ratio, and total fat. And they did this all by DEXA scans. And what they found was that a 10% increase in ultra-processed foods resulted in more visceral adipose tissue and more overall fat. So even if they were eating the same amount of calories, if they were eating more in ultra-processed food, they had more visceral adipose tissue and more overall fat. Now, the other kicker is ultra-processed foods have actually been shown to increase how much you eat by as much as 500 calories a day. All right, what about carbs overall? There was a 2003 clinical trial that was published in the Journal of Nutrition that looked into how different diets, they looked at one higher in protein and lower in carbs compared to a more traditional higher carb diet, worked for women trying to lose weight. So there were 24 women, they were aged 45 to 56, who were overweight. Now, half of these women followed a diet with 68 grams of protein daily, and the other half followed a diet with 125 grams of protein daily. And both of the diets had the same amount of calories and the same amount of fat. So after 10 weeks, the group on the higher protein diet lost slightly more weight, about 7.53 kilograms compared to 6.96 kilograms for the other group. However, the weight lost by the higher protein group was mainly fat, while the other group lost a little bit more lean muscle. Now, both groups saw improvements in the cholesterol levels, but only the higher protein group had significant decreases in triglycerides and a marker for heart health called the ratio of triglycerides to HDL cholesterol. So what does this mean? That increasing protein intake while cutting back on carbs could help improve your metabolic health. So the takeaway here is swap out some of your carbs for protein. And that's why I say eat protein first. You're going to have a better thermic effect from the food. You're going to have better satiety, and you're going to have better satisfaction. You'll tend to have less cravings. The next step is activity. First thing I want you to think about, because, when you think about metabolism, you've got your basal metabolic rate, you've got the thermic effect of food, and then you have activity. And when we think of activity, most people think of exercise. But before we even talk about exercise, I want you to think about activity first, because this is the thing that you're going to make the biggest difference with. And this can impact how many calories you spend throughout the day pretty significantly. So there was a cool study where they looked at 3 groups. It was 2019. It was published in the BMC Public Health Journal. And what they looked at was how 12,000 steps a day could affect your body shape and metabolic health. And they did it with obese college students. So again, 3 groups. One group was the control group. They did nothing. One group was told to walk 12,000 steps a day. And another group was told, okay, to walk 12,000 steps a day, but 3 days a week and go faster. So they used smartwatches to track their steps for the first 8 weeks, right? And what the results showed is that those 2 groups that were told to do the 12,000 steps, they did 12,000 steps. There was no real difference between those 2 groups in the amount of steps. However, this is where things get cool. The group that was told to do the brisk walking 3 days a week had notable improvements in their hip size and visceral fat. They also had better levels of good cholesterol, lower fasting blood sugar and triglyceride, which means that they got better metabolic health by adding in that intensity. I want you to start tracking your daily activity. And the first thing I always have people do is, before we start to even talk exercise, let's make sure you're getting in your 8 to 12,000 steps a day. As soon as we got that nailed, let's add in some intensity, because adding in that intensity can help reduce risk factors. It can improve body composition, and it can also help reduce risk factors for heart disease. And you're doing the same amount of steps. And here's the better thing. When you do them a little brisker, it's less time. So a study from the Journal of Sport and Health Science in March 2024 found that prolonged daily sitting time was associated with higher total and trunk fat percentages, while sufficient physical activity was associated with lower total and trunk fat percentages. And here's the kicker. The higher body fat associated with 6 hours a day or more sitting may not be offset by achieving more than 150 minutes a week of physical activity. There was a 2018 meta-analysis that was published in Sports Medicine that looked at the effectiveness of HIIT in reducing total abdominal and visceral fat in adults who were either normal weight or overweight obese. And they looked at 39 different studies, and 617 participants. Average age was about 40 years, 52% of them were female. And what they found was that high-intensity interval training significantly lowered total abdominal and visceral fat. Now, the higher intensity HIIT, that means 90% or more of peak heart rate, was actually better at reducing total body fat, but lower intensities like 70 to 90% was better for abdominal and visceral adipose tissue. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but intensity is going to raise my cortisol. And here's the thing. Yes, chronic stress, chronically elevated cortisol can make you have more belly fat. HIIT training does the opposite, because it actually teaches your body how to get stressed and recover, get stressed and recover. You want the short-term stressors that teach your body how to handle stress. Now, the other exercise I want you to do is resistance training. Now, not because resistance training is going to do any spot reduction. I do want you to think of resistance training as what I call your metabolic Spanx. It does hold everything in tighter and boosts your metabolism, because muscle protein turnover is expensive. It's costly. It uses a lot of calories. And because muscle is the first place we can start to improve that insulin sensitivity. And remember, being insulin resistant, which supposedly now less than 7% in population is metabolically healthy, when you're insulin resistant, it's basically impairing your body's ability to use insulin effectively to control your blood sugar. What that means is now you have higher insulin levels, and higher insulin levels tell your body to store fat. Let's talk about sleep, because just one poor night of sleep causes insulin resistance, causes increased appetite, and causes increased fat deposition overall and more visceral adipose tissue. So So sleeping, getting that quality 7 to 9 hours a night of sleep is critical for losing belly fat. Hormone balance is also critical. If you're in perimenopause, you may have noticed that you've started to gain some belly fat because estrogen is needed to build muscle, to burn fat, and keep your metabolism humming. In fact, your estrogen drops, your metabolism drops. So if you're in that phase, run to a menopause specialist and see if hormone replacement therapy is right for you. One more thing that you may not have thought of in terms of dropping belly fat is drinking water. And here's why it matters. Turns out even mild dehydration causes your body to free up glucose in the liver because it's stored in the liver as glycogen. It's free up to glucose and turned into fructose and stored as fat. Your body does that in an effort to store some fat so that if you're dehydrated, you can then burn that fat to free up water. So mild dehydration can make you store more fat, and specifically around the belly. Caloric restriction. Move more, get those 8 to 12,000 steps in, add high intensity interval training, and that resistance training. Get your 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep in. But biggest thing of all is do not stress over all of it. And by the way, that's probably the hardest advice of all, right? You might feel like this is an uphill battle if you're over the age of 40, but you're not automatically signed up for struggle in middle age. I'm sharing how the right nutrition can help you build muscle and burn fat a lot more easily in this next video, and which supplements you should use daily to keep moving towards your goals.